Hi, I'm George Hammond, conference producer at Technology Networks, and I'm here to introduce our next talk, 5 Strategies to Boost Staff Retention and Enhance Performance. I'm incredibly pleased to welcome our next speaker, Stephanie Whitehead. Stephanie is the Executive Director of Pathology at a large health system in South Texas. Stephanie currently serves on the Board of Directors for the ASCP as the Chair-elect for the Council of Laboratory Professionals and is an active member of the ASCLS Mentorship, Emerging Laboratory Managers Collaborative Conference Steering Committee, and the Diversity Advocacy Committees. In addition to her career in laboratory medicine, Stephanie plays an active role in the local community through her involvement with the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, the Junior League of San Antonio, and the Girl Scouts of America. A very warm welcome to you, Stephanie. Following the presentation, we will have a Q&A session, and we welcome any questions that you may have. Please ask questions using the Q&A system to the right-hand side of the video player. You can also use this feature to connect with attendees and discuss the talk, so feel free to take advantage of the chat system by introducing yourself and sharing your thoughts during Stephanie's presentation. You can also benefit from some fantastic supporting literature, which you can download for free below the video player. If you experience any technical difficulties during the presentation, please request help using the technical help icon in the menu on the left-hand side of the player. And now, without further ado, I will hand over to Stephanie to begin her presentation.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for allowing me to join you in your conference today. And in today's session, I will be reviewing 5 strategies to boost your staff retention and enhance performance in the clinical laboratory. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the technical networks for this opportunity for today, and then offer one acknowledgement and disclosure. As read in my bio, I'd like to disclose that I am the co-host of a laboratory-based podcast called Elaborate Topics. The QR code for more information regarding my show it will be in the final slide. And in this talk, I will also reference information from various laboratory professional organizations and books. So let's review the objectives for the talk today. In today's talk, I will define employee retention and its importance. I'll also describe the benefits of a strong retention plan and provide strategies to retain your employees. And I'll also discuss the role of feedback in driving employee performance. So, what do some of these terms really mean? The first term I'll review is what exactly is turnover? Turnover essentially is the rate at which an employee leaves your department or your organization and is replaced by another one. It's usually represented in a percentage. In essence, turnover is the rate in which you are replacing your employees one for another. There are 2 types of turnover. Voluntary turnover means that an employee voluntarily left your organization for good. So promotions and transfers are not typically counted in this metric. And some typical reasons for voluntary turnover might be relocation or the employee left to find a better job opportunity. Involuntary turnover means that an employee was asked to exit the organization rather than leaving on their own. So let's now talk about how you would calculate your turnover rate. To calculate your turnover rate, you take the percentage of the number of employees who left and divide that by the average number of employees over a period. You'd multiply that number by 100 to gather your percentage. In a time frame of 1 year can be used if your organization does not have a standard. My organization uses a standard of less than 19%. If a position was recently added, you would exclude that from your calculation, of course. And so now I'll give you a short example. For example, say over the last year, 9 employees left company ABC, and company ABC had an average of 91 employees over that time. In this equation, then you would divide 9 by 91 and multiply that number by 100, which would equal a turnover rate of 9.89%. Now that we've learned what turnover rate is and how you can calculate it, let's talk about retention. Essentially, employee retention is the ability of your organization to keep or retain its talent and its skilled workforce. If your team has a high turnover rate, the good news is that by listening to this session, hopefully, we'll give you some tools to begin to combat that starting today and to strengthen your retention rate by using the right practices and the correct strategies. So you might ask, why is monitoring your employee retention and developing a plan to support that employee retention so important? Well, let me answer that. An effective employee retention plan increases the organization's focus on retaining your most talented and skilled, also engaged employees. And by doing this, you promote the health and success of your laboratory and your organization. The time and the stress and the cost also of hiring and training new employees can be very significant. And turnover has a very negative impact on the overall performance of any department. Having a high turnover in your employees and your team can come with multiple management and operational issues, including high costs, knowledge lost, and low productivity. And what do I mean by that? Let me elaborate a little bit further. Increased employee retention can result in reduced operational costs. Replacing employees is expensive. These costs that I'm talking about can be experienced when you're looking at advertising, the time that your team spends on interviewing candidates, the time your team spends on onboarding, and the time a new hire spends on training. Good retention will also lead to improved quality and knowledge in your laboratory. When you look at seasoned employees leave, that knowledge also goes with them. When employees fail to relay their institutional knowledge to their teams, their knowledge and skills can be lost forever and impact the quality of your team. And you can just think about this as the most skilled person in your department, if that's a laboratory or your team that you're working in, and the impact if that most skilled person were to actually leave. Sometimes when some people leave, it takes 1 to 2 new employees to help fulfill the job of one knowledgeable person on your team. So good retention can improve productivity. When you have your positions filled, the loss of number of unproductive hours can pile up. And when other employees have to pick up that slack, they can easily develop burnout. So it's essential that your employees stay so they can improve morale. When value employee leaves, it's always a downer on the team. Effective retention strategies can also help with boosting that morale. When your morale is high, your workplace is more positive, obviously, and you're having more engagement because you have more tenured employees. Let's continue the conversation about why retention is important. And particularly in the laboratory profession, there is a well-documented workforce shortage. If you haven't heard about that workforce shortage, per the ASCLS, there are several factors that impact and get, but most commonly, retirement, the number of programs that are out there. To an extent, turnover is natural, but the pandemic recently and its impact on the laboratory profession has increased the number of unpredicted rate of open positions in our profession, which makes this topic even more relevant for today. With that said, the recruitment to fill positions can be more challenging for all of these reasons and more. And as mentioned, increased vacancies lead to employee stress and burnout through extended shifts, overtime, potentially inadequate training. Unfortunately, people no longer feel compelled to serve an organization that they feel is not serving them. So while we focus on hiring and retention, we also want to focus on retaining our staff once they start. So who ultimately influences your turnover rate? Well, that answer, in my perception, in my opinion, is the entire team. A lot of times managers and leaders will take on the responsibility and the burden of their entire team's morale. But I would say the morale and the engagement and the retention is an entire team problem. The entire organization and team plays a role in decreasing turnover and increasing employee retention and engagement. Here's an important tip. It's important to know the difference between employee satisfaction and employee engagement so that you can set realistic expectations as you go through this process. Satisfaction relates to happiness and enthusiasm. These are intrinsic feelings, and several factors can impact this in a person's life daily. And some of these your managers have no control over. The things that may happen in a person's personal life that may contribute to their unhappiness are not necessarily known or in the control of a management team. Engagement, however, is a choice that people make daily because they have connected to the purpose of their job and the mission of where they work. A Gallup survey states that 50% of the workforce quits every day, but not physically. They just disengage from work. So try to learn how to identify disengaged employees in your organization. This typically appears in employees that are less productive, exhibit negative behavior, and focus less on the job at hand, perhaps even being frequently tardy. Next, I'll go into the 5 tactics to learn how to improve your staff retention. The first one being be strategic when you hire. Investing in the right hire from the jump can ensure that you aren't throwing away recruitment hours and training investment. About 80% of turnover is due to bad hiring decisions. And you don't want to spend time on a new hire that will just be there for a few months. Think about how long it takes to appropriately train some people in some areas. And so I'm thinking about certain areas of our laboratory where it takes a person up to a year to be able to train and work productively in that area. So you definitely want to make sure that you're hiring the right person that aligns with the mission and the vision and the values of that organization up front. To avoid misalignment in skills and roles and responsibilities, consider conducting behavioral-based interviews and peer interviews. Also take some time to understand what your needs are. That way you can clearly explain those expectations to any candidate applying for this job. This will help you be aware of possible mismatches in experience and culture during the interview process. And so what that means is if you are looking for a person who has a certain number of years in experience in a certain area, make sure that you're understanding that prior to the interview process and hiring people who match the skills that you need for that position. The next tip or the next strategy would be effective onboarding. So once you've found the right candidate for the job, let's talk about how to effectively onboard them into your department. Effective onboarding is an integral part of retaining employees. About 40% of employees who do not receive adequate training leave their job within a year. So let's be prepared when we hire our new employees. Onboarding is more than just giving someone a tour of your office or training them for a few days, but onboarding should be a year-long process that achieves multiple goals, such as reinforces a positive impression, sets clear expectation, clarifying your policies and your benefits, and integrating that new employee into your culture of your organization. It also connects the new hires to the existing team. When you ensure your onboarding process is solid, it helps to ensure that employees understand the organization they work for and how their role specifically contributes to the mission and vision and the goals at large. Tactic number 3, expectations. Make sure your employees know what is expected of them by setting clear expectations in job roles to help alleviate unnecessary confusion. A lot of times, unclear expectations can equal misinformation and unneeded stress. Many people don't leave their jobs. They're going to the hospital or the organization up the street because they want to leave the manager and the supervisor that is causing confusion and the culture that that confusion creates. For all employees, be sure to provide a framework for success. So when they come on, what does it mean to go above and beyond expectations? How does an employee know if they are successful in their training or in their job duties? Make sure that those expectations are set up front so the employee knows how to be successful in their new job role. Fourth, show appreciation. There's a quote that I love that says, "Those who drink water must first remember who dug the well." And for me, as a leader, that means let's celebrate our teams and not just huge wins, but celebrate small wins. We do something in our laboratory called Look for the Good, because it's so easy for us to find bad things, or to only really concentrate on the things that are not working well. So we try our best to celebrate work anniversaries, completions of big projects. Did we get a recent certification, or did somebody get a promotion? Sharing stories about your organization increases morale and helps your employees to understand how they are impacting the mission at large. And let's face it, intrinsically, we all like recognition and we all like to be valued for the work that we do. Let's talk about managing across generations. And this is an important tip that correlates with showing appreciation because different generations require different things to help keep them engaged. Some employees are motivated by salary and monetary benefits, but other employees are more motivated by recognition. So take some time to talk to your employees and understand your team and know what is motivating them. Finally, let's talk about active listening as a tactic to retain your team. Speaking of your employees, when you're talking to your staff, make sure you actively listen, but also act on any feedback. What do you think would happen if you continue to receive feedback from your team, but don't implement any of the changes or do anything with the feedback? Well, of course, then your team would start to feel like it's pointless to provide any feedback. So I'd suggest when you're talking to your team, when you're actively listening, take action and be consistent in taking that action. An easy way to do this is to provide a platform for your employees to speak and a platform for your employees to voice processes that they feel need to be improved within your team. A process that we've used in our organization is called the stoplight. An example of a stoplight is projected on the screen for you to view right now. This stoplight is a way to solicit ideas and allows for you to provide the feedback as a leader to your team. In addition to using the stoplight, you can conduct exit interviews on people leaving your department. Exit interviews are a great way to cultivate feedback on what is driving turnover. And also, if your organization conducts an employee survey on any level of basis, maybe annually, make sure you're paying attention to the comments and the things that are in those employee surveys. Let's talk about another way to gain feedback from your staff, and that would be feedback through rounding. Rounding is a way for you to proactively engage, listen to, and communicate with your employees. Rounding helps you connect with your staff on your goals and helps you build a relationship with them. I love to round with my team at least once a week. This is an opportunity to talk to your employees, and it's also a great way to know what's going on and connect with them on the purpose of your department. Here's an example of a tool that I've used in the past. Rounding is more than just walking up to a person and saying, "Hey, how's it going this morning?" and walking off. It's an intentional conversation. You can refer back to previous conversations if you use this tool. So I love to use this so that I can write myself notes. And then when I go back to that employee, I could always refer back to some of the things that we talked about previously. With these strategies, you'll be able to connect with your team and positively, for sure, influence your turnover rate. The next point that I want to make is about how to use consistent feedback as a tool to drive your performance and accountability in your department. As you're going through and you're rounding, you're gathering feedback, you're addressing some of the things that your team feels like can be improved in your area. What you really want to do is make sure that you can establish a strategy to cultivate accountability in your department. One system that I love to use is high, middle, low, which is a systematic approach developed by Quint Studer and creates a consistent method of providing meaningful staff feedback, setting appropriate standards for performance, and managing your staff's expectation. So let's talk about giving consistent staff feedback. When we talk about giving consistent staff feedback, this means that many times leaders tend to spend 80% of their time on employees that give them the most trouble and 20% of their time on your high performers. And that's called the 80-20 rule, when we spend 80% of our time on employees that are low performers and only 20% of our time on employees that are high performers. What I like about the high, middle, low management model is it helps to reverse that 80-20 rule, where it offers you strategies and support to support those leaders and spending more energy in your most engaged staff. In essence, you're spending your time and investing your time in employees that will generate the highest return on investment. So let's talk about those performance gaps. In a typical organization, 30 to 40% of employees are high performers. These are the people, if you're thinking about your team, that if they quit, it would have a huge impact to your team. These are the people who always step up for a project. They're generally very reliable, that you can give them projects and they're completed efficiently. And most of the team look to them as informal or formal leaders. About 58% of your team will be middle performers, which is fine. These are the people who have good attendance. They are loyal most of the time. They usually have a good attitude. Occasionally, they can be brought down by the negative attitudes of others, but for the most part, they clock in, they do their job, and then they leave, which is fine. These are the 58% of your middle performers are generally the workforce and the workhorses of your team and your organization. Then you have 8 to 10% of your department that would be low performers. And these are the people who are not meeting management expectations. They generally have a poor attitude and they are not good team members to your team. So if you think about this as an example of people on a boat, if you have 10 people on a boat, then you've got 3 people rowing forward, 6 people generally just paddling, and at least 1 person sitting in the back doing not much of anything as dead weight. What the high, middle, low strategy from Quint Studer offers you is a way to rectify this and right size this. So let's talk about our high performers. Like I said, these high performers are generally self-sufficient employees. So why don't we usually spend most of our time on them? And it's usually because the low performers are taking up most of that time. Many times high performers can believe that low performers are our favorites because they see them in our offices. They see us talking to the low performers more than often. And they can generally feel ignored. As high performers, they may perceive that they are being overlooked, and they never get thanked by their boss. A lot of times, when you are a high performer, the thank you get is more work because people know that you can handle it and that you will get things done and that you produce things very well. So most managers tend to focus all their time on low performing employees when there are only about 1 to 3% of them, 1 to 3% of changing their mind in them becoming a middle or a high performer. Another great statistic that is interesting is 47% of high performers are actively looking for another job, updating their resume or conducting internet searches and fielding interviews. And this can be disappointing to hear because we just talked about how high performers are those that would have a great impact if they left our organization. That is because they feel overwhelmed and unthanked. They feel like they don't have that recognition and they understand that their value can be produced anywhere that they work. So by understanding your high, middle, low employees and by working with them accordingly and holding them accountable, you can accomplish many things. Your goal through consistent feedback to each group is to re-recruit and praise and celebrate those high performers through targeted and consistent feedback, rounding, and coaching. Your goal is to move your middle performers to high performers through continuous coaching and continuous motivation. And your goal is to move your low performers to middle performers or out of the organization through appropriate documentation by holding them accountable to any failed actions and job expectation updates. When you do this, you demonstrate to the entire team your care and concern for the strongest team possible and your commitment to each one of them in their own individual growth and development. You also affirm to your high and middle performers that you appreciate that the work that they do is important and valuable to the team. In addition, you've also let your subpar performance or those who have subpar performance know exactly where they stand and the next steps that they need to do in order to maintain an appropriate spot on your team. The consistent feedback model requires a lot of skill at effective communication and crucial conversations. And that's why I love the book, Crucial Conversations, which appears on your screen now. A crucial conversation is a discussion between two or more people where the stakes are high, opinions can vary, and emotions run very strong. When we face crucial conversations, we can do one of three things per this book. We can avoid them, we can face them and handle them properly, or we can face them and handle them poorly. Ironically, the more crucial the conversation, the less likely we are to handle it well. And what I found in my career is typically the only way to handle tough communications well is to have many of them. What you'll find is that the more crucial conversations you have, the more effective you will become at handling crucial conversations. So rather than being afraid or steering away from them or avoiding them, I encourage you to find resources through a trusted mentor, a trusted colleague, or even a book like this or others like it as great tools to guide you and help you in learning how to have effective conversations so that you can effectively communicate to your team, hold them accountable, and give them great feedback through effective communication. In conclusion, here are my key points on the screen. Retention is important because continuous recruitment, training, and orientation is expensive to your organization. Like I mentioned, the time that you and your team may spend fielding candidates, interviewing, onboarding effectively, showing appreciation, orienting people into your department for them to leave can be redundant and cause burnout. People work short while positions are waiting to be filled, which can lead to anxiety, stress, and a poor mental state for your team. And improved retention results in better care for your team, better care for your patient, improved quality, and decreased errors. I'd like to thank you all for joining the session today. The QR code that I mentioned for our Elaborate Topics podcast is on your screen. Be sure to connect with me on all of my social medias using the tagline listed on your screen. And at this time, I'm happy to take any questions.